This is cultural training session number 1 by Hafsa Hussain. According to the assignment, we were told that we should imagine that we're working for a US trading firm. So the name I designed for this firm is Star Spangled Trading Company, and I provided a little more detail about it in the following slides. So this company is responsible for importing and exporting goods between countries. Among their clients, of course, are French and Americans, and this company imports and exports different kind of products. These include cosmetic items, clothing, and unperishable food items. And the reason I say unperishable because they don't get expired soon, so it's easier to transport them. And the reason I will be holding this session is because, as mentioned previously, the clients include French and Americans, and obviously, while working together, there might be some differences that might arise. And these differences obviously need to be overcome if the company hopes to achieve its goals. But not to worry, because I, as Hafsa Hussain, the cultural consultant of the team, would guide the fellow French and American employees on how to work together. So now, just to let you know, there are many similarities and differences between the United States and French cultures, and I mapped those out on this cultural scale. It's hand-drawn, so forgive me if it's not that good. And if you can see on the cultural scale, I marked France with dashed lines, and they're like pink dashed lines. The US is marked with straight lines, and the color of the line is purple. And to further distinguish between the two, I specifically marked the points for France with dashes and the points for US with round dots. So yeah, you can, I'm sure, see the similarities and differences between the two. Of course, I wrote them down to make it easier. So the similarity I found between the two cultures is that both prefer a top-down uh, decision-making style. Uh, According to the author, uh, Erin Mayer, from her book Cultural Map, these cultures tend to make little d decisions, which means that the decision is created by the boss, and employees are expected to follow them regardless of whether they approve of them or not. And even if they do change, they're changed with the approval of the boss and after they have been implemented. Now let's move on to the concept of cultural relativity. So when I say that the US and France are uh, top down, like they prefer a top down approach, I don't mean that they're extremely top down. It's just in relation to one another, they're almost close on the top down side. And there can be other countries that may see them as more egalitarian, actually, more consensual. Um, but yeah, I mean, in comparison to one another, they're almost the same amount, like they almost prefer the same amount of top-down approach. But yeah, there are other countries that might consider them consensual, and there are others that might consider them more top-down. So it's all about cultural relativity. So here I'm talking about France in terms of America, and vice versa. And this cultural relativity concept also applied to the differences. So let's move on to the differences. So the differences I found was that the US is extremely low context. Now, if you notice, I wrote extremely because US is literally on the edge, whereas France is a bit more high context. I say a bit more high context because it's closer to the edge, but not on the edge. When it comes to evaluating style, we already know, since we had a funny example in the book, the US gives a slightly indirect negative feedback, whereas France gives a slightly more direct negative feedback. Persuasion, the US is extremely applications first, whereas France is extremely principles first. And then trusting. The US is extremely task based, whereas France is a bit more relationship based. The reason I say again, US is extremely task based because it's on the edge, and France is a bit more relationship based because it's closer to the edge. It's not very near to the relationship based part. Anyway, before I mention like how to solve these problems, let me share a few funny incidents that were mentioned in the book Cultural Map, and that resulted because of the differences between the French and American cultures. One was, as you all know, was the one with Dulac. She was a French employee who started working for an American company. She thought things were going quite well, but her and her cultural consultant, Erin Meard, also the author of the book, contacted Dulac's boss. The boss said that she is performing very well on a lot of matters, but there are some matters that she isn't performing well on. And like Mir was confused because Dulac said that she's performing very well. It turned out that when it comes to direct negative feedback, French people give direct negative feedback, whereas Americans don't. So, but since Dulac's American boss didn't give her a direct negative feedback like a French boss would do, she thought she was doing very well when it wasn't really the truth. Then the other funny incident was shared by the author herself. She said that when she was attending a meeting with her French colleagues, after the meeting ended, they didn't recap the points and they were like, voila. And they were like, and she was like, but voila what? Because, like, in her own culture, the American culture, they obviously recap the points, but in the French environment, this didn't happen. So she was pretty confused about it. So yeah, let's get back down to how to resolve the differences. Now, it's true that some Americans and French might have had amusing experiences, but this is not always the case. Fights can result, and this can cause chaos because tasks either may not be completed or delayed. So it's important to resolve these differences. So let's see how to resolve them. Um, so as mentioned before, US is extremely low context while France is more high context. This may result in Americans thinking that French do not express their thoughts openly. On the other hand, the French might feel the Americans state the obvious, so there are several solutions that could be implemented. First, being that the French could tell the Americans that sometimes they give hidden messages and that Americans should catch on to them, and they also do not recap the main points so Americans can, take points during the meeting. The second solution is Americans letting the French know that they recap main points at the end of a meeting, so they shouldn't uh, like they should tell the French, their French colleagues that they do not think them as dumb or as children. It's just the way they do things. The third solution could be the both of the cultures deciding which kind of language to use. Although of course, in this difference, it would be preferable to use low context language. Um, and if you notice all the solutions, the first and the second solutions in which the French or the Americans tell how things go on in their culture, I say that apply these solutions if one of them is in the majority. The reason I say that is because even though there might be equal number of employees right now, one of them or some of them could leave either due to being transferred or promoted or some other reason. So uh, that's why I mentioned this majority thing, because there could be a majority of one of the cultures um, in certain situations. Second differences between the two is that French give more direct negative feedback than the Americans, and this could be resolved by Americans letting the French know that they give 3 positive points about someone before telling the negatives. The French could let the Americans know that they give more direct negative feedback. There could also be a solution in which both of them decide which is the best way to give direct negative feedback. The best way they could decide that is by using downgraders rather than upgraders, saying like, you can improve this a little bit rather than saying this assignment was totally trash. So yeah, So this is what they can do. Again, I mentioned the majority, minority, and everything else in the solutions thing, because you never know when one employee can leave due to personal reason or being transferred or whatever. Okay, so the third difference between the two is that the French and Americans have a very different way to persuade one another. Americans are extremely applications first, and French are extremely principles first. Now, the issue with this is that there's a huge gap between the two, and like regardless of whether who's in majority, who's not, it's important to create a solution that would affect both of them positively. So before going on to the solutions, let's explain what applications first is. Applications first means that, giving examples of applying a concept first before talking about the concept, whereas principles first refers to talking about the concept and then giving real life examples related to it. To resolve this issue, the meetings could introduce the topic very concise, like in very precise terms, like there should be like only one or two sentences of it, and then they could quickly move on to the examples so that both parties are satisfied. The fourth difference between the two is their positions on the trusting skill. Americans are very task based, whereas French are more relationship based. But to resolve these differences, the French would let their American colleagues know that they value informal meetings as well as formal ones, and however, they should also keep in mind Americans' value of time. Like they do not like informal meetings as much as the French do, so they should let the Americans know how long an informal meeting will last. This would prevent the Americans from feeling as if they wasted too much time, or they can leave whenever they want to. But at the same time, they spend a considerable amount of time with the French, and establish a good relationship with them. The second the second way they could resolve this issue is Americans letting the French know that they keep their professional and personal life separate, which means their friendship won't affect their work. The Americans would look at their work objectively, regardless of how good friends they are. So the French shouldn't believe, like they can form friendships, but they shouldn't think that this will affect their work in any way. And the last solution is creating a strategy that would value both types of trust. This could uh, satisfy both parties. But yeah, this I feel like this might be a rare case, because changing your cultural view entirely might be a bit difficult. But yeah, this third strategy can also be applied in some cases. So now comes to the conclusion. Uh, Yay, we're at the end. Um, so yeah, France and United States have different positions on the cultural scale, but they can work in harmony if they adopt strategies that benefit them both. And I already told you which these were. And also to mention is that they may have similarities, but sorry, they may have differences, but they also have similarities. So we shouldn't think the two cultures as completely apart. But whatever differences there are, they need to be resolved so that no issues arise. And yeah, this is the summary of all the points that were discussed. The similarities and differences between the French and the American. Similarities related to their styles of deciding. Differences that are related to their communicating, evaluating, persuading, and trusting. Americans use more low context language, are more indirect in giving negative feedback, are applications first, are more task based, and whatever solutions are applied according to who's in majority and who isn't. And if there's equal amount of both cultures, there should also always be a discussion and a vote to decide what strategy could be done. And then, as mentioned before, I all the examples I took and the concepts I discussed were from this book, Cultural Map by Erin Meyer. And yeah, this is the end. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sticking till the end. And yeah, until next time, uh, uh, until we meet again. And this is Hafsa Hussain. Thank you so much for attending this cultural session.